Bill?
Yes, we can.
Great. Good. So hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for today's webinar titled Data Migration from an On-Prem to MySQL in the Azure Cloud. My name is Bill Haydock. I'm the CEO of RTTS, the parent company of QuerySurge. This is the first in our four-part series on data validation and ETL testing. Each webinar's target frame is for only 30 minutes. Our goal is to keep them short and to the point, and we'll be providing the recordings of all the sessions at a later date. Eric Smythe, QuerySurge's Director of Alliances, will kick off the webinar with a short presentation, and then Chris Thompson, our Senior Solutions Architect, will be providing the demo. Lastly, Rashad Evans, QuerySurge's Director of Product Support, will be answering any questions you may have. Which reminds me, if you have any questions during the webinar, please type them into the Q&A panel. We'll answer as many questions as we can after Rashad's demo, after Chris's demo. Also, please use chat to alert us if there are any issues seeing or hearing the session. Thanks again for your time and participation. Now I'll hand over to Eric to kick off. Eric, all yours.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for all those attending. What we have planned for you today is to provide a brief overview of what QuerySurge is, specifically how it can be used for data migration testing, and then to show the demonstration of the product, as Bill mentioned. Also, this is the first part of a four-part series. You can see the dates and times of the other sessions that we'll be conducting later this month. I'd like to start by talking about the QuerySurge business case. We know that executives make critical business decisions based off of their BI and analytics reports, and the assumption is that the underlying data that's fed into these reports is correct. But due to work with customers, we know that's not always the case. Bad data can be introduced into the architecture and can affect the validity and accuracy of those reports. Well, how does that happen? Well, data comes from many different sources that are typically ETL'd into one or more data warehouses. That information rolls up into data marts and then eventually into these reports. At the same time, there could be a data lake in the architecture that's used for ingestion and curation of data. There may be a data migration project going on, as well as ERP systems feeding data to your warehouse or to your reports. The point is, anytime data is moving from one component to another in the architecture, there's a possibility of a defect being introduced, and that's what QuerySurge can help address. It can help validate the data as it's moving through your architecture. What is QuerySurge? QuerySurge is the smart testing solution for automated validation and testing of data. The QuerySurge use cases are listed here: data warehouse ETL testing, big data testing, DevOps and continuous testing, data migration testing, BI report testing, as well as enterprise app ERP testing. Today's focus is going to be specifically on data migration testing. We have over 170 customers in 30 plus countries. You could see a partial list here. We have a more extensive list on our website. One of the things I always like to mention here is you take a look at some of these companies. It spans all different vertical markets. So no matter what industry you're in, your organization is probably collecting large amounts of data. And all these customers chose QuerySurge to help them automate the testing of their data platforms. How does QuerySurge work? Well, we have a concept of the test, which we call a query pair, and that query pair connects to any two data points at one time. So you'll specify a source system that could be a traditional database, a mainframe or flat file, and a target system, which could be a data lake, data warehouse, BI report. And at the time of test execution, QuerySurge will request data from both source and target systems and bring that data back into tabular result sets, and it will look to compare every single cell of every single record that's returned. And QuerySurge will aggregate that information into reports and graphs, so to give customers a good impression of the overall health of their data as it stands. QuerySurge connects to over 200 different data stores. You can see a partial list here. QuerySurge comes bundled with many different drivers, but for most platforms, you can typically download a JDBC driver from the vendor's website, incorporate it into QuerySurge, and then use that for any of the tests that you may look to run. Today, we're going to focus specifically on MySQL databases for our migration use case. Some of the benefits of using QuerySurge for a data migration project is the ability to quickly verify table-to-table comparisons, checking all fields for hundreds of tables in minutes. We have a query wizard, which will be demonstrated, that will be able to show you how these tests can be designed and quickly executed to give you quick results. Confirmation that all rows have been imported correctly, including row count verifications. Our wizard has the capability of giving you that information, so you can do tests quickly to make sure that all the data came over. Performs all the necessary column-to-column comparisons. You can specify specifically which columns you want to test and which columns you may want to exclude from any type of data test that you're creating. And in addition, it performs verification of not only the data, but the data types and also data thresholds. So we can specify a numeric tolerance whether a test should pass or fail based off of the differences in those data sets. So here's the migration use case we're going to focus on today. We have an on-premise source database, which is going to be MySQL. And we're going to look to migrate that data into a MySQL database that resides in the Microsoft Azure cloud. So typically what's going to happen is there's going to be some process which is going to be handled by the development team, which is going to migrate that data from the on-premise location into the cloud location. Once that process begins, you're then going to want to use QuerySurge to be able to validate that process. And the way that's done is QuerySurge will connect to both the on-prem and cloud location. It will send SQL data or SQL requests to both the source and target systems, and then the data will come back to QuerySurge for analysis, and we'll be able to detect whether those tests are successful or not, as well as be able to send off automatic email notifications if there is an indication of any type of problem. So hopefully that provides a high-level overview of what we're going to cover today. I'm going to now transition the session over to Chris Thompson, and he will be able to conduct today's session.
Thanks, Eric. Let me just get set up here. I need to be able to share my screen.
You should now have presenter privileges, Chris.
Yep, thank you. All right, let me know when you can see my screen.
Yes, we can see your screen.
All right, my name is Chris Thompson. I'm part of the QuerySurge team, and I'm going to be demonstrating testing of a migration today. And I'm going to start off just by logging into QuerySurge. So when you first log into QuerySurge, you're presented with a dashboard. The dashboard is completely customizable. There are widgets that you can set up and modify as needed. Additionally, you're also by default logged into presented with the design library over here on the left. And just to go over the modules real quick, we have a design library module for creating tests, so what we call query pairs. We have a scheduling module for scheduling those tests in bulk. We have a run dashboard for real-time execution of those suites or schedules, a reporting module, and an admin module. Now for today, we're going to be creating some query pairs for testing a migration. So I'm just going to flip over real quick to a typical mapping document. Now, sometimes you might have these for data migrations, but for the case of today, I've created this. We're going to be doing XMart is a fictitious electronics company. We're going to be testing a migration from their source, MySQL, that is local, to the Azure Cloud MySQL. And they have 7 total tables. 6 tables are direct maps, so they're direct copies from the source to the target. And additionally, on the 7th, we've added an additional column to make things a little more interesting, where we'll be able to demonstrate some of the other wizard capabilities. So I'm going to start off with the first 6, and we're going to create those using the wizard. So let me pop back over to QuerySurge, and we will launch the query wizard from the menu and select our connections. We'll be connecting from a local source MySQL database to a cloud target MySQL database. And just to go over some of the comparison types that we have column level comparisons for the wizards, which can help you do comparisons of various columns individually. We also have table level comparisons, which is great for migrations. It allows you to quickly create query pairs from table to table. And we also have row count. The 2 I'll be going over today is column level and table level. We'll start with the table. And we'll select our schemas. All right, so when the query wizard pops up, we've given our source tables here and our target tables here, and then our query mappings over on the left. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag and drop from the source to the target, each table. And you'll notice as I do that, these mappings are being created. And additionally, those query pairs are located here, both your source query and your target query. And you'll notice that I also selected, and I want to get rid of the customer dim table there. So we'll remove that because we're going to do that separately in the column wizard. And I will select next. Given a next dialog, we can create a new folder in our design library for these query pairs, or we could use an existing one. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to create a new one. I'm going to put it in our root query pairs folder, and I'm going to call it XMart Migration. I'm also going to create a test suite where those query pairs can be executed in bulk, and I'm going to call that the same thing. Click Next. It gives you a nice little review panel before you create those query pairs, and let's go ahead and click Create. So now QuerySurge has created those 6 query pairs, created the folder over here, and it's also created a test suite, which I'll show you shortly. So let's just double click in here and we could take a look. So here's our 6 query pairs, one for each table that were created. They are just select stars, but if you had hundreds and hundreds of tables, this could do it in a very quick manner. And now I'm going to jump over to our scheduling module and show you that indeed a test suite was created. And if I click on that test suite, we can see the query pairs that are contained within that test suite, and I can execute them. Now there's 3 ways to execute. I could do a one-time execution where I could add multiple suites together at one time, or I could do a reoccurring schedule. So if I wanted to run every night at midnight, I would be able to do that here. But for demonstration purposes, I'm going to simply right-click it and say Run Now. So these query pairs are executing. You'll notice on the left, these are all the scenarios that were executed prior. You're also given some statuses of those queries as they run through the test suite. And additionally, you have query activity over time. So if you can imagine, if you had hundreds and hundreds of query pairs, this would be something useful. I'll double click our test suite, and we'll maximize that. And we could see that these query pairs have executed. The green check mark showing that they have passed, and a red exclamation point to show that they have failed. And I can individually click on these to get what exactly occurred. So in this case, I brought back for the source row count for this query pair, I brought almost 6,000 rows, same with the target, and indeed the data field-to-field verification did match. But I'll jump into this one that did fail. So on each query pair result set, we have our source data. Additionally, we have our target data and any failures. In this case, we did have a total of 18 failures that we could see here. So what appears to be here is that there's 18 rows in the target that are not in the source. And by just taking a quick look, you can see that perhaps they were duplicates. This could be a potential issue. I have the ability to export this data to Excel, CSV, or XML, and let the development team or the person in charge to let them know that there could potentially be an issue. All right, so now we skip back to our mapping document, and we could just mark these as done. I've now created these query pairs, and we had the product dim table that did fail. So for later reference, just give myself the, okay. So now for the more interesting table, which is the customer dim table. This customer dim came from source to target. All the data came over, but on the target side, we have an extra column. So this is a great example for using the column level comparison within QuerySurge. So we'll go ahead and flip back over to QuerySurge and close that window. We'll go back to the design library or the query wizard and select our connections, our local MySQL to our cloud. And we're going to do a column level. Select our schemas. All right, so similarly to the table comparison, but with an extra section for our columns, we have our wizard where I'm just going to drag our source table over to there, which will automatically create our mapping. I could also do multiple ones of these at the same time, but for demonstration, we're just going to do one today. And you'll notice when I select that, it brings back all the columns for that table over here. So now we want to map those together. We could simply drag these over and say first to first and last to last name, or what's a new feature that we've just added is this auto link columns feature, which will automatically link those together. So now all our columns are linked together. And if you'll notice down on the left, down here on the bottom, we have our source query being developed by QuerySurge and our target query also being created. I do want to point out that I want to specify a key. When you specify a key in QuerySurge, it helps QuerySurge identify failures, and it also assists with performance and optimization. So selecting keys is a good idea. All right. I'm just going to click Create. All right, so in this particular case, I'm going to add to an existing folder, and I want to put it in that same folder we created earlier, XSmart Migration. And since I already have a test suite, I'm going to say no to creating a test suite. All right, we get the same sort of information. Before we create it, I'll go ahead and create that query pair. The query pair was created. I'll go back to the design library to see if that is the case. And we'll just do a refresh there. So our new query pair, a column level query pair has been created. I'll double click and we'll go into there. We can see that the SQL was automatically created by QuerySurge on both the source and the target. And here's where most of our work will be done. So I'll talk about some of the tabs of a query pair. So query pair properties, there's different things that could be done. You could do data type checking. So you could check if the data types between source and target match. We could do row counts to see if the row counts match up as well. Shared key columns. You notice that we added a key column before, and if we scroll here, we'll be able to see that the customer ID was added there. There's also threshold options and some duplicate row options. Now I'll move over to what we call design time run. So this is if you were creating these and you just wanted to do a one-off run of a single query pair, you would do that here. I'll go ahead and run this query pair now. And while it's execution, it's going to give us some analysis of that data, how long things took. And while this is running, we also have what's called, there we go, never mind. So we had 3250 source rows, 3250 target rows with a failed row count of 542. And we'll go ahead and take a look at these results. Now, similarly to the scheduling module, a similar layout, we have all the source, all the target data, as well as any failures. So the failures in this particular case, if I just scroll over to the right, are highlighted, and they're highlighted on the phone column. It appears that the null translation over to the target has come over as 0. So all nulls for phones appear to be over as 0. Again, I could export this information and send it over to the development team. And I'm just going to check my time. Okay. So that's the table level comparison. I also want to do one from scratch for this Azure customer ID that was added onto the target table for the migration. and I have some SQL pre-generated, so I don't have to create it as we go, but I'm just going to create one. And so I'm just going to make sure that that Azure customer ID does not contain null values. So I'm just going to go pop back over to QuerySurge, go into our folder, right click and say create new query pair. And I'm going to save that and pop that in there for our source query, our target query, set up our connections. We're going from our local source to our cloud, save the query pair, and now have a query pair to make sure that that column in the target is not null. Now I'm going to jump over to scheduling, add that to our test suite. So I'll go over on the right-hand side. We have our query pair library that we can simply drag things over to our test suite. And I need to add the column one that we added after we created the test suite, as well as the not null check. And we'll go ahead and click save, and I'll execute this one last time. And while it's running, you can even double click into these and watch it in real time. And there we go. And we can even start double clicking in and starting to look at some of the results while it finishes. All right, so we did have a failure on the not null query pair for the Azure customer ID field. We will double check the failures here. Take a look. So apparently on the target side, we did find a null value for customer ID equal to 4. Again, we could export this information and send it to the development team. Additionally, I'll be able to demonstrate the email notifications, which I've set up. So if I go over to my Gmail account, we can see that I did execute 2 scenarios. I could look at the last one. And a report has been generated for me upon completion of this scenario. And the report contains all the query pairs, how many failed, how many passed, an overall pass rate. But what's really interesting, it did about almost 250,000 verifications in approximately, it's just a few seconds, I think, average query execution. Data reliability is 99.7 with 669 failures. And here's all the individual query pairs. I could go ahead and click into one of these, and it'll take me to QuerySurge to that exact result set. And I think that's all I have, so I'm going to pass it back to Eric.
Actually, you're going to pass it back to me, Chris. Thanks.
You got it.
Rashad Evans, QuerySurge's Director of Product Support, will now answer any questions you may have. If you have any, please type them into the Q&A window, and he'll answer them. Rashad?
Thanks, Bill. Nice presentation, Chris. We only have a few questions. As Bill mentioned, if you have any additional, please tap them into the Q&A section. First question is, how are transformations more complex than what was shown in the demo handled? Well, as Chris showed you, you have the concept of a query pair. And when you actually click into a query pair, there are source and target panes that allow you to enter SQL into those areas for your source and target SQL. So any transformations that you need to enter or apply to source data based off of your data mapping or source to target mapping document would be done there with SQL that you can use based off of the data technology to which you're connecting. So if you're connecting to an Oracle database or a MySQL database, you can use any of the built-in functions in order to apply the transformational logic and then be able to have that transformation be executed in your regression testing. The next question is how do we configure email notifications? Email notifications are configured in each project within QuerySurge in the administration module. The administration module has a tree on the left-hand side that will have a section for email configuration and notifications. And the first thing that you'll do is you will set up your email system given the link or the URL for your email system and the port on which it works. And then you'll set up your email notifications, which will allow you to set up customized formats of emails. You can mark it up with HTML, and then you can customize your trigger points. So say, for instance, you want an email notification only to trigger when a scenario fails, then it will allow you to set that up and get the email notification only on failed scenario executions. The next question is there any limitation on the volume of data? The only limitation in QuerySurge is the size of the disk on which QuerySurge is installed. There are no other real limitations. You can query 1,000 records, or you can query 1,000,000 records, or you can query 100 million records. QuerySurge does not impose any limitations on the amount of records that you can return. Again, only the amount of available space that you have on the disk on which QuerySurge is installed. Another question is, how does QuerySurge handle integrations with other tool sets like ETL tools, Informatica, DataStage, and or CI/CD tools? QuerySurge offers several different APIs. Those APIs come in two flavors. There's a CLI flavor of the API and a RESTful flavor of the API. Either of those types of APIs will allow you to call into QuerySurge from external tool sets so you can integrate your workflow or integrate QuerySurge's execution in your existing workflows. And then it allows you to make decisions based off of the result sets because QuerySurge will pass back result sets or outcomes to the calling tool sets. So again, it allows you to integrate with your existing tool sets and your existing workflows to make better decisions on what to do next based off of your testing initiatives. The next question is, can QuerySurge connect to distributed file systems like HDFS and Hive or S3? And the answer is yes. QuerySurge can connect to those distributed file systems, much like they are regular database systems. There are JDBC drivers that are out there that allow you to connect to these distributed file systems, and there are utilities such as Dremio and Apache Drill that also allow you to connect to them. And then you can simply query them with standard SQL as you would do any other database and return your result sets as well. The next question is, can this be integrated with any defect management tool so that defects can be logged and tracked automatically? And the answer to that question also is yes. There are, amongst the APIs that I mentioned earlier, we do offer deep integrated APIs with 3 of the main test management solutions out there. Azure DevOps, formerly known as TFS from Microsoft, RQM from the IBM suite, and from formerly HP, formerly Mercury, now Micro Focus, the ALM solution. You can essentially call into QuerySurge from those test management solutions. QuerySurge will execute the tests and then pass back the outcome values to those test management solutions so that they can automatically be tracked for your execution. You can also create defects with some of these solutions based off of the API capabilities that we have as well.
Rashad, can I jump in a second? I just
Yep,
got hit with a good question. Is there a limitation on the volume of data?
I think I answered that one a little while ago, but I'll answer it again. There is no
sorry.
on the volume of data. No problem. It is a very good question. There is no, and I'll reiterate, there is no limitation on the volume of data. Again, the only limitation is the disk on which QuerySurge is installed. So again, if you have millions of records that you are looking to test, even in a single test, you can certainly perform that test with QuerySurge as well.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. And then the last question I'll answer here, and if I don't get to your question, we will do our best to get back to you with the questions that were not answered. But the last question I'll answer here is, will this work with an SFTP file as the source? And the answer to that question is also yes. There is a driver that ships with QuerySurge called our flat file driver that allows you to connect to FTP locations, SFTP locations, and other remote locations as a file, as a source. And similar to what I was mentioning with your distributed file systems, you'll be able to issue standard SQL against those files and be able to query against them. So as I mentioned,
Great.
that will be the last question that I answer, and we'll get back to you as best we can with the questions that I did not answer. Bill?
Great. Thanks, Rashad, Eric, Chris. That wraps up the Q&A session. Thanks again for your time and participation today. Also, we'll be sending a follow-up email to you with a link to the recording once it comes out, and our contact information if you have any additional questions. Also, next week we'll have another webinar, ETL testing of a Snowflake data lake. So if you haven't registered, please feel free to do so. And then we have 2 follow-up webinars. They're all on our website. So thanks again, everyone, and have a great day.